The morning air at Riverside Elementary tasted like September, cool enough to remind you that summer was fading, warm enough that you didn't need a jacket yet. Please take a minute to like, comment, and subscribe. We post at least 3 times a week to share tales of true worth. David Marsh stood at his post on the corner of Oak and Maple, one hand gripping the aluminum pole of his stop sign, the other resting against his thigh. The yellow reflective vest caught the early sunlight and threw it back in sharp angles. He'd been wearing this vest for 3 years now, and the fabric had started to fade at the shoulders where the sun hit it every morning. The straps had worn grooves into his collarbones. He could feel them even when he wasn't wearing it. 7:45, right on schedule. The first bus rounded the corner, its brakes hissing and squealing as it slowed. David knew that sound. Brake pads worn down to maybe 30%. The driver should have reported it by now, but probably hadn't. Budget cuts. Always budget cuts. He raised his stop sign and stepped into the crosswalk, his boots scuffing against the faded white paint. A line of cars waited patiently, engines idling, exhaust hanging in the cool morning air. He knew most of them by now. The blue Subaru with the cracked taillight, that was Mrs. Chen. Always 5 minutes early. Always listening to NPR with the volume too loud. He could hear the tinny voices through her closed windows. The red pickup truck 2 cars back, Mr. Rodriguez. Always eating a breakfast burrito from the gas station, always getting salsa on his shirt, always waving with his free hand even though his mouth was full. The white minivan with the stick figure family decal peeling off the back window, the Pattersons, 3 kids, the youngest still in a car seat. The middle child always forgot his backpack and they'd have to circle back. David didn't just watch traffic. He tracked it, analyzed it, predicted it. His eyes moved in a pattern he'd developed without consciously thinking about it. Approaching car, speed and brake response time, child on sidewalk and their level of attention, parent distraction indicators, peripheral scan for anomalies, repeat. The whole cycle took 4 seconds. He'd done it so many times that it felt like breathing. He noticed which parents were on their phones. Mrs. Henderson in the silver Toyota, texting with one hand while steering with the other. Her daughter already unbuckled in the back seat. He noticed which cars had worn brake pads by the sound they made stopping. High-pitched squeal meant metal on metal. Grinding meant rotors were damaged. He positioned himself at angles that gave him maximum sight lines down both streets, always keeping his body oriented so he could see in 3 directions at once without having to turn his head. A woman waved from her car window, smiling. "Morning, David." "Morning, Lisa." He smiled back and waved. "How's Emma feeling? Still got that cough?" "Much better, thanks for asking. The humidifier really helped." "Good, glad to hear it. Tell her I said hi." He remembered names, not just the parents, the kids too. He knew which kid belonged to which car, what time they usually arrived, which ones needed extra time to cross because they were younger or easily distracted, which ones had developmental delays and might not react to hand signals the same way. He knew that Tommy Chen was afraid of loud noises and would freeze if a car honked. He knew that the Rodriguez twins would try to race each other across the street if you didn't stop them. He knew that little Maya Patterson would stop in the middle of the crosswalk to pick up a leaf if she saw one that was pretty enough. It wasn't hard, it just required attention. Attention and care. Linda Martinez, the other crossing guard stationed at the north entrance by the kindergarten drop-off, gave him a thumbs up from across the parking lot. He returned it. They had a system. Simple signals that meant everything was normal. Thumbs up meant all clear. Palm down meant slow down, watch for something. Fist meant stop. Something's wrong, call the office. He'd never had to use the fist signal. But then David saw the silver Honda Accord. It wasn't in the normal drop-off zone. It was pulled over along the curb, maybe 50 feet past where parents were supposed to stop. The nose of the car pointed toward the exit. The engine was running. He could see the faint shimmer of exhaust in the cool air. The driver, a man in his 30s with dark hair and an unshaven face, sat rigid behind the wheel, both hands gripping it at 10 and 2, like he was holding on for dear life. His shoulders were hunched up near his ears. Tension, extreme tension. In the back seat, visible through the rear window, a little girl with brown hair in pigtails was crying. Not the tantrum kind of crying kids did when they didn't want to go to school. The scared kind. The kind that made David's stomach tighten. He knew them. Marcus Turner and his daughter Sophie, 7 years old, second grade, Mrs. Whitmore's class, loved unicorns and the color purple, drew pictures during lunch, usually arrived with her mom on Tuesdays and Thursdays, with her dad on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. Today was Tuesday. David felt the first flutter of wrongness in his chest. The sensation was familiar, a tightening just below his sternum, like someone had reached in and squeezed. He'd learned to trust that feeling 30 years ago, when he was still on the force. It was the feeling that said, something isn't right here. Pay attention. This could go bad. A moment later, a gray sedan pulled into the proper drop-off lane with too much speed, tires chirping slightly as the driver braked hard. A woman got out before the car had fully stopped. Rachel Turner, Sophie's mother. She was moving fast, her face tight with something between anger and panic. Her purse was still on the passenger seat. She'd left the driver's door open. The car was still running. She marched toward the Honda, her flat slapping against the asphalt. "Marcus, what are you doing? She's supposed to be with me today." Marcus didn't roll down his window. He stared straight ahead through the windshield. Jaw clenched, knuckles white on the steering wheel. Rachel pounded on the glass with the flat of her hand. "Marcus, open the door! Marcus!" The sound echoed across the parking lot. Other parents were starting to notice now. Mrs. Chen had stopped halfway through the drop-off lane, her car idling. Mr. Rodriguez had his window down, leaning out to see what was happening. The Patterson kids were craning their necks in their car seats. David's body shifted without him thinking about it. His weight moved forward onto the balls of his feet, his center of gravity dropping slightly. His hand lowered from the stop sign to his side, fingers loose and ready. His breathing slowed, automatic response, muscle memory from decades of training. His field of vision widened, taking in everything. Marcus's posture, Rachel's body language, the other cars, the children on the sidewalk, the exits. He glanced at Linda and raised his left hand, palm down. Fingers spread, a gesture that looked casual but meant something specific. Trouble. Call the office, lock the doors. Linda's eyes widened. She understood immediately. She pulled out her phone. David walked toward the Honda. Not running. Running would escalate things, but purposeful. His stride was measured, each step placed deliberately. The gravel crunched under his boots. He could hear his own breathing, steady and controlled. Could feel his heartbeat, elevated but not racing. Could taste the metallic edge of adrenaline on his tongue. Marcus put the car in drive. Rachel screamed, "Marcus, don't you dare! Don't you dare!" David moved into the street, positioning himself between the Honda and the parking lot exit. Not directly in front. That would be threatening. Would back Marcus into a corner, with no options except forward or retreat. But at an angle, close enough that Marcus would have to acknowledge him to leave, would have to make the conscious decision to go around him. "Hey, Marcus," David said. His voice was different now. Still calm, still measured, but there was weight to it. Authority that came from somewhere deep in his chest. The voice he'd used for 23 years when he needed someone to listen, when lives depended on them listening. "Let's talk for a second before anybody goes anywhere." Marcus's eyes snapped to him. They were bloodshot, red-rimmed, hadn't slept, maybe crying, definitely terrified. "Get out of the way." Marcus's voice cracked on the last word. "I can see Sophie's upset." David kept his hands visible, down at his sides, non-threatening. "I can see her upset. Before we do anything else, before anyone leaves or anyone calls anyone, let's just take a breath and talk about what's going on. Can we do that?" Marcus's jaw clenched tighter. A muscle jumped in his cheek. "You don't understand." "Then help me understand." On the sidewalk, maybe 20 feet away, a small boy with a dinosaur backpack stood frozen, watching. Kenji Yamamoto, 8 years old. He had a routine every morning, arrived at 7:48, waited at the corner, gave David a high five when he crossed, went straight to his classroom, never varied. His mother said routines helped him feel safe, helped him manage his anxiety. But Kenji's face was different now, confused, frightened. His small hands gripped the straps of his backpack, like they were the only solid thing in the world. Mr. David's voice was different. The way he was standing was different. The way he was looking at that car was different. This wasn't the crossing guard. This was someone else, Kenji's mother, Yuki, put her hand on his shoulder. She was watching David too, her expression uncertain. Other parents were getting out of their cars now. Mr. Rodriguez had his phone out. Mrs. Chen was talking to someone through her window. Maybe her husband, maybe 911. David could feel the situation expanding. More people getting involved, more variables to track. In another minute, someone would call the police if Linda hadn't already, and then this would become something else entirely, something harder to control. Marcus. David took one step closer, just one, his movements slow and deliberate. I need you to listen to me for just a minute, just 60 seconds. Can you give me that? Marcus's hand was still on the gear shift. The car was still in drive. His foot was on the brake. David could tell by the way the brake lights glowed red. But his foot could move, could shift to the gas, could send 3,500 pounds of metal and glass through the parking lot at 30, 40, 50 miles an hour. I'm not losing her. Marcus's voice broke. Tears started down his face. I'm not. Nobody said you're losing her. David's voice softened but didn't lose its authority. But right now, at this exact moment, Sophie's crying. I can hear her. You can hear her. And you don't want that. I know you don't want that. Rachel was on her phone now, her hands shaking so badly she almost dropped it. She was dialing. David saw it in his peripheral vision. He raised his hand toward her, just slightly, a subtle motion that most people wouldn't even notice. Not yet. Give me time. Let me work. She hesitated, finger hovering over the call button, then lowered the phone. But she didn't put it away. David kept his focus on Marcus. He leaned forward slightly, not threatening, just closing the distance enough that Marcus would have to see him, would have to acknowledge his presence. In that moment, standing in the middle of the parking lot with a scared father in a car and a terrified child in the back seat, David felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. David didn't move from his position. He could feel the morning sun warming the back of his neck, could smell the diesel from the buses, could hear the distant sound of children's voices from inside the school. Normal sounds, ordinary sounds. A normal Tuesday morning. Except it wasn't. Marcus's hand was still on the gear shift, trembling now. David could see it shaking even from 10 feet away. The tremor traveled up his arm to his shoulder, making his whole upper body vibrate with tension. Marcus, I need you to listen to me for just a minute. Can you do that? I'm not losing her. Marcus's voice was raw, scraped clean of everything except fear. I'm not. Nobody said you're losing her. David took another step, angling so he could see both Marcus and Sophie in the back seat. The little girl had her hands over her ears, her face red and streaked with tears. But right now, Sophie's scared. She doesn't understand what's happening. And you don't want that. I know you don't. You don't know anything. But there was no anger in it, just desperation. Then tell me. The seconds stretched. David could hear his own heartbeat in his ears, could feel sweat starting to form under his vest despite the cool morning air. He was aware of everything around him. Rachel standing 10 feet to his left, her phone still in her hand. Mr. Rodriguez still in his truck, engine idling. Mrs. Chen's Subaru with the headlights on, casting long shadows. Kenji on the sidewalk, his mother's hand on his shoulder. 23 years. That's how long David had done this. Not crossing guard work, this. Standing between someone in crisis and the worst decision of their life. Talking to people who'd reached the end of their rope, who couldn't see any other options, who were so deep in their own pain that they'd stopped thinking clearly. He'd talked down armed suspects. Barricaded subjects, people threatening suicide, domestic situations where someone had a knife or a gun or just their fists and 20 years of rage. He'd spent hours in hallways on phones, standing in parking lots exactly like this one, using nothing but his voice and his training and his ability to read people. He studied Marcus the way he used to study everyone. Every micro-expression, every shift in posture, every tell that indicated what they were thinking. Shallow breathing, chest rising and falling too fast, hyperventilating. That meant panic was setting in. The logical brain shutting down as the amygdala took over. Fight or flight. Adrenaline flooding the system. Rational thought becoming harder. White knuckles on the steering wheel. Death grip. That meant he was holding on to something, literally and figuratively. Holding on to control, holding on to his daughter, holding on to whatever plan he'd made. But the eyes. The eyes were the most important part. Every 3 seconds, Marcus's gaze flicked to the rearview mirror, not checking behind him, checking on Sophie. Then back to David, then to the mirror again, back to David. Mirror, David, mirror. That was the anchor. That was the thing David needed to understand. Marcus wasn't thinking about himself anymore. He wasn't thinking about escape routes or what would happen to him. He was thinking about her. People who'd made their final decision stopped checking on others. Their eyes went flat and distant. They stopped engaging. They'd already committed to whatever they were going to do, and nothing you said would reach them. Marcus was still looking, still checking, still connected to reality enough to see his daughter's fear. That meant there was still time. Marcus, David's voice was quieter now, almost gentle. What happened? What happened that made you think this was the only option? Marcus's face crumpled. For a second, he looked like he might break down completely. The hearing, yesterday. The judge. He couldn't finish. Tell me. She said I'm only allowed supervised visits now. Supervised. The word came out like a curse. Like I'm some kind of criminal. Like I'm dangerous. David nodded slowly. That must have hurt. Hurt? Marcus laughed, but it was bitter and sharp. It destroyed me. She's my daughter. I would never hurt her. Never. I've never even raised my voice at her. And they're treating me like I'm a monster. I believe you. Those 3 words hung in the air between them. Marcus stared at him, searching his face for signs that he was lying, that he was just saying what he thought Marcus wanted to hear. But David meant it. He'd seen enough abusive parents to know what they looked like, how they talked, how they justified their actions. Marcus didn't look like that. He looked like a father who was drowning. You don't even know me, Marcus whispered. I know you show up every morning, David said. I know you walk Sophie to the crosswalk and you wait until she gets inside the building before you leave. I know you packed her lunch last Wednesday when Rachel forgot. I know you carry Band-Aids in your glove compartment because Sophie falls down a lot. I know you're a dad who cares. Marcus's eyes widened. He hadn't realized anyone was watching that closely. But Marcus, David's voice hardened slightly. The second you drive away with her right now, you lose her forever. You prove the judge right. You become the thing they're afraid you are. Is that what you want? Behind them, 2 patrol cars pulled into the parking lot. No sirens. Someone had that much sense at least. But the lights were flashing, red and blue cutting through the morning air. David felt his chest tighten. This was where it could all go sideways. 2 officers got out of the first car. Young, mid-20s probably. David recognized the type immediately. Fresh from the academy, maybe a year or 2 on patrol. Trained to treat every situation like a potential combat scenario. Their body language was all wrong. Tense, aggressive, hands hovering near their belts. Officer Grant, according to his name tag, approached with his jaw set and his shoulders squared. Sir, step away from the vehicle. David held up one hand without turning around, keeping his eyes on Marcus. I've got this under control. Sir, this is a police matter. Step aside. He's talking. He's not running. Let me finish. Officer Hayes, Grant's partner, moved to David's left, trying to flank the situation. Are you family? No, but then you need to step back. Now. David felt the situation shifting beneath his feet like sand. Marcus saw the cops and his breathing quickened. His chest started heaving. His hand on the gear shift tensed. His foot shifted on the brake pedal. No, don't do this. Don't escalate this. Marcus. David's voice cut through sharply. Look at me, not them, me. But Officer Grant was already moving forward, his hand going to his radio. Dispatch, I need backup at Riverside Elementary. We have a possible custodial interference situation. Suspect in vehicle with minor, refusing to comply with verbal commands. David's jaw clenched so hard his teeth hurt. This was exactly how it went wrong. This was how people got hurt. He thought about his last case, the one that ended his career, 3 years ago. But it felt like yesterday. Robert Chen, software engineer, no criminal record, no history of violence. Just a man whose wife had filed for divorce and he couldn't accept it. He'd barricaded himself in his apartment with his 2 kids, a boy 9 and a girl 6. Said he wasn't giving them up. said she'd turn them against him. David had arrived at 3 in the afternoon. The apartment complex had been evacuated. Sharpshooters on the roof. SWAT geared up in the parking lot. Captain Morrison wanted to breach. David had convinced him to wait. Let me try first. He'd spent 4 hours in that hallway. 4 hours standing outside apartment 3B, talking through a door, building trust, word by word. He'd talked about his own daughter, about how hard divorce was, about how the kids needed both parents. He'd listened to Robert's fears, his anger, his grief. He'd validated Robert's pain without validating his actions. And it worked. At 7:15 p.m., Robert had opened the door. The kids were safe. Everyone walked away. But there was a problem. Robert's wife, Jennifer Chen, had been David's daughter Emily's third-grade teacher. Small town. Everyone knew everyone. David had been to parent-teacher conferences in that woman's classroom, had helped Emily with homework assignments Mrs. Chen had given, had seen her at the grocery store and at school events and at the fall carnival. His captain had pulled him aside afterward. David, you can't work cases where you know the people. I didn't know Robert. You knew his wife, you knew his kids, you were too close. It didn't affect my judgment. I got them out safely. This time. Captain Morrison had looked tired, old. But what about next time? What happens when it's someone closer? When it's your daughter's best friend's father? When you're standing in that hallway and you're not thinking about the suspect, you're thinking about Emily. David had wanted to argue, had wanted to say that caring about people made him better at his job, not worse, that empathy was a strength. But Morrison was right. David was too close. He'd been doing this for 30 years, and he couldn't keep the walls up anymore. He saw his own family in every crisis, his own daughter in every child at risk, his own wife in every domestic situation. He was burned out, hollowed out, running on fumes and willpower. He took the retirement package. 62 years old, full pension, a handshake from the chief and a plaque with his name on it. His wife Sarah had suggested the crossing guard job. You miss the kids, she'd said. You miss being around them. But this way there's no wait, no life or death decisions, just helping them cross the street safely. She meant well, but the weight never left. It just shifted. Because standing in a parking lot, watching a father about to make the worst decision of his life, David realized something. He was never going to stop being who he was. Marcus. David forced himself back to the present. His voice was steady but urgent. I know what this is about. The custody system is broken. I know it feels like nobody's listening to you, like you're being erased from your own daughter's life. But this isn't the answer. You know that. Deep down, you know that. Sophie screamed from the back seat, high and piercing. Daddy, I want mom. I want mom. Marcus's face crumpled like paper. His shoulders shook. Tears poured down his face. And David saw it. The exact moment. The moment when Marcus's resolve broke. His hand left the gearshift. Everything happened in slow motion. Marcus's shoulders sagged forward, his head dropping toward the steering wheel. His hands slid down from 10 and 2 to rest in his lap. His whole body seemed to deflate, all the tension rushing out of him at once like air from a punctured tire. But Officer Grant didn't see it, or if he did, he didn't trust it. He saw a man in a car with a child who wasn't responding to commands. He saw a potential kidnapping situation. He saw a threat. Sir, turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle, now. David raised his hand. Officer, he's complying. Give him a second. I gave you an order, sir. Step back from the vehicle. He's not a threat. Grant's hand moved to his belt. Not his weapon, his taser. The yellow and black device with the LED light that could drop a grown man in seconds. This is your final warning. Step back now or I will physically remove you. David watched Marcus's body language shift again. The resignation that had been there a moment ago was gone. Now it was fear. Pure animal fear. His eyes went wide. His breathing went from fast to hyperventilating. His hands came back up to the steering wheel. Fight or flight response. Adrenaline dump. The thinking brain shutting down completely. Marcus, it's okay. David kept his voice level, controlled, even though his own heart was hammering. They're just scared. They don't understand what's happening. But I do. I know you're not dangerous. I know you're just a dad who loves his daughter. Officer Hayes was circling around the passenger side now, moving toward Sophie's door. Rachel was crying, saying, "Please don't hurt him. Please, he's not dangerous," over and over. Parents were pulling their kids back, some getting in their cars and leaving. Mr. Rodriguez had his phone up, filming. Kenji was still on the sidewalk, frozen. His mother was trying to pull him away, but he wouldn't move. His eyes were locked on David. David made a choice. He stepped between Officer Grant and the car, putting his body directly in the officer's path. "Sir, move now, or I will physically remove you." "My name is David Marsh," he said it, loud enough for both officers to hear, loud enough that his voice carried across the parking lot. "I'm a retired crisis negotiator with this department. Badge number 2847. I have been talking to this man for 5 minutes and he is responding. If you escalate this situation right now, you will lose him. Do you understand me?" Grant hesitated. "A negotiator? 23 years. Crisis negotiation unit. And I'm telling you, back off and let me finish." Hayes stopped his approach to Sophie's door. He looked at Grant. Grant looked at David. There was a moment of calculation, of assessment. David could see it happening behind the young officer's eyes, weighing his training against this stranger's authority, weighing protocol against instinct. Grant's radio crackled. "Unit 23, what's your status?" Grant keyed his mic without taking his eyes off David. "Stand by. Backup is 3 minutes out." 3 minutes. David could work with that, had to work with that. He turned back to Marcus, lowering his voice so it was just between the two of them. "Marcus, I need you to do something for me. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded, barely. His whole body was shaking now. "I need you to turn off the engine. That's step 1. Just turn off the engine, and I promise you, these officers will not do anything until we've talked this through, okay? They're going to arrest me." Marcus's voice was hollow, empty. "Maybe. But running makes it worse. You know that." "What's the point? They're taking her away either way." "The point," David said quietly, "is that if you run, you never see her again. Ever. They don't let kidnappers have custody, Marcus. They don't let kidnappers have visitation. You become a criminal." For the rest of her life, when Sophie thinks about her father, she thinks about this moment. About you driving away, with her screaming in the back seat. Is that the memory you want her to have? Marcus's breath hitched. Fresh tears. "But if you turn off this car right now, if you step out and face whatever comes, then you're the father who made the right choice. The father who loved her enough to let her go when she was scared." That's the memory she gets to keep. David could see Marcus processing this, could see the war happening behind his eyes, could see him weighing his options, running scenarios, trying to find a way out that didn't exist. Marcus's hand hovered over the keys. His fingers trembled. The tremor traveled up his arm, his whole body vibrating with it now. His jaw was clenched so tight, David worried he'd crack a tooth. His eyes kept darting to the mirror, to Sophie, still crying, her face buried in her hands. David watched his fingers, watched the way they uncurled from the fist they'd been making, watched them extend toward the ignition, watched the microscopic movements, the muscle memory fighting against conscious thought. The parking lot was silent except for Sophie's crying. Even the birds had stopped singing. The sun was higher now, warming the asphalt, making the air shimmer. Officer Hayes had his hand on his radio, ready to call it in if things went sideways. Officer Grant's jaw was set, his body coiled and ready to move. Rachel was praying under her breath. David could see her lips moving, could see her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. Kenji was crying now too, silent tears running down his face. His mother had given up trying to move him. She just stood there with her hand on his shoulder, watching. David held Marcus's gaze, didn't look away, didn't blink. Just held that connection, that thread of trust they built over the last 10 minutes. "You've got this, Marcus. You're stronger than you think. You're better than this moment. Don't let this moment define you." Marcus's hand moved. His fingers touched the key. He turned it. The engine shut off. The silence was deafening. For 3 seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Then Marcus opened the car door and stepped out, hands raised, tears streaming down his face. Officer Grant moved forward immediately, but David put his arm out. Give him space. Grant looked like he wanted to argue, but something in David's tone stopped him. David walked to the back door and opened it gently, slowly. Sophie was still crying, her face red and streaked with tears, her hands shaking. Hey, Sophie. David knelt down so he was at her eye level. You're okay. Everything's going to be okay now. She looked at him with wide, frightened eyes. Is Daddy in trouble? Your daddy loves you very much, and right now, your mom is waiting for you. Can I walk you over to her? Sophie nodded. David helped her out of the car seat, his hands gentle. She was so small, 7 years old and barely 40 pounds. Her unicorn backpack was on the floor. He picked it up and slung it over his own shoulder. They walked across the parking lot together, Sophie's small hand in his. Each step felt like a mile. He could feel everyone watching, could feel the weight of all those eyes. Rachel collapsed to her knees when they reached her, pulling Sophie into her arms and sobbing. Oh, baby. Oh, my baby. You're okay. You're okay. Sophie clung to her mother. Mommy, I was scared. I know, baby. I know. It's over now. It's over. Behind them, Officer Grant was putting handcuffs on Marcus, not roughly, but firmly. The metallic click of the cuffs locking echoed across the parking lot. Marcus didn't resist. He just stood there, head down, shoulders shaking. I'm sorry, he said. His voice carried across the distance. Sophie, I'm sorry. Sophie turned in her mother's arms and looked at him. Daddy? I love you, baby. I love you so much. Officer Hayes was reading Marcus's rights. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. ... David stepped between them before Grant could lead Marcus away. He put his hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus, look at me. Marcus raised his head. His face was destroyed, completely broken. You did the right thing. It took guts to turn off that engine. Remember that. Marcus's voice was barely a whisper. I didn't feel brave. That's what courage is, doing the right thing when you're terrified. When it feels like the whole world is ending, you chose your daughter over your fear. That's what good fathers do. A tear rolled down Marcus's cheek. Am I ever going to see her again? I don't know, David said honestly. But you gave yourself a chance. You gave her a father she can still be proud of. That's worth something. Officer Grant cleared his throat. Sir, we need to transport him. David nodded and stepped back. He watched them walk Marcus to the patrol car, watched them put him in the back seat, watched the car pull away with its lights still flashing. Officer Hayes approached, his expression uncertain. Sir, we're going to need a statement from you. For the report. That's fine. Can I get your full name and contact information? David Marsh, M-A-R-S-H. Hayes pulled out a notebook and started writing. As he did, he glanced at Grant, who was talking on his radio. Want me to run him, just for the report? Standard procedure. Grant shrugged. Yeah, go ahead. Hayes walked back to his patrol car and got on the computer. David watched parents starting to leave now that the crisis was over. The bell had rung 5 minutes ago. School had started. Everything was returning to normal. Except Kenji was still on the sidewalk. David walked over to him. The boy's face was streaked with tears, his dinosaur backpack hanging off one shoulder. Hey, buddy, you okay? Kenji shook his head. I thought he was going to hurt that little girl. He wasn't going to hurt her. He was just scared. But the police came. The police only come when something bad happens. David knelt down. Sometimes the police come because they want to help, because they want to make sure everyone is safe. That's their job. They're not bad guys. They were trying to help too. But you helped better. David smiled despite himself. Sometimes people need different kinds of help. The officers did their job. I've had a lot of practice talking to people who are scared. Are you a superhero? David laughed, a real laugh that surprised him. Nobody, just a crossing guard. Kenji's mother, Yuki, finally spoke. Come on, honey, you're late for class. Kenji looked up at David. Are you going to be here tomorrow? I'll be here, same as always, 7:45. Promise? Promise. Kenji gave him a high five, their routine, and walked toward the building with his mother. David watched him go. When he turned back, Officer Hayes was walking toward him with a strange expression on his face. Not the aggressive confidence from before. something closer to embarrassment. Behind him, Officer Grant was reading something on Hayes's computer screen, his face pale. Mr. Marsh?" Hayes stopped a few feet away. We didn't realize." David waited. "You're?" Hayes looked at his notebook. "You're certified in crisis negotiation, advanced hostage negotiation tactics. You trained over 60 officers. You have 14 commendations for—" He trailed off. "For what, officer?" "For successful crisis resolution. 127 cases. 0 fatalities." The number hung in the air between them. Officer Grant walked over slowly. His jaw was tight, his face flushed. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because it wasn't about me." David picked up his stop sign from where he'd left it on the ground. It was about getting that little girl safely to her mother. That's all that mattered. "Still, we should have—" "You did your job. You responded to a call. You assessed a threat. That's exactly what you're supposed to do." David's voice was firm, but not unkind. "But next time, before you decide to force a situation, ask yourself if there's another option. Ask yourself if the person in crisis needs handcuffs, or if they need someone to listen. That's what I'd tell the officers I trained." Hayes looked like he wanted to say more, but David was already walking back to his post. The morning rush was over. Most of the kids were in class. But there would be stragglers. There always were. Kids who missed the bus. Kids whose parents overslept. He took his position on the corner, stop sign in hand, and waited. Officer Grant sat in his patrol car 2 hours later, filling out the incident report. His hands hovered over the keyboard as he tried to figure out how to write what had happened without making himself look like an idiot. Responded to report of custodial interference at Riverside Elementary. Upon arrival, observed civilian engaging with suspect. Civilian identified himself as David Marsh, retired crisis negotiator. Civilian successfully de-escalated situation resulting in peaceful resolution. No use of force required. Suspect taken into custody without incident. He stared at the screen. It sounded so simple when you wrote it like that. So clean. It didn't capture the way his heart had been pounding, the way he'd been ready to tase a crossing guard for not following orders, the way he'd almost made everything worse. His radio crackled. "Unit 23, return to station. Sergeant Vance wants to see you." Grant's stomach dropped. Copy. 40 minutes later, he and Hayes stood in Sergeant Paula Vance's office. She was behind her desk, reading their report on her computer. She was 52, 24 years on the force, and had a reputation for not suffering fools. She looked up at them. "David Marsh." It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am," Grant said. "You tried to pull rank on David Marsh." "We didn't know who he was." Vance leaned back in her chair. "How long have you been on patrol, Grant?" 18 months. "Hayes?" 14 months. She nodded slowly. Then she opened her desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. Turned it so they could see. It showed a classroom full of officers in folding chairs. Training day. Most of them looked young and uncomfortable in their uniforms. "That's from 15 years ago," Vance said. "Crisis negotiation training. Mandatory for all patrol officers. See that guy in the front row?" Grant leaned forward. The man in the front row was younger, had more hair, but the face was unmistakable. David Marsh. "He taught that class," Vance continued. "He taught the class I took when I made patrol. He taught the advanced course when I made detective. He literally wrote half the training manual you're supposed to follow for crisis situations." Hayes's face went red. "We didn't. You didn't know. I understand that. But that's not an excuse." Vance's voice was hard now. "You showed up to a delicate situation with your egos leading the way. You saw a civilian and decided he didn't know what he was doing. You almost tased a man who has forgotten more about crisis negotiation than you'll learn in your entire careers." Grant wanted to defend himself, but couldn't find the words. "Do you know what his record is?" Vance didn't wait for an answer. 127 successful negotiations. Hostage situations, barricaded subjects, suicide interventions, domestic standoffs. 127 times he talked someone down from the worst moment of their life. And you know how many people died during those negotiations? Silence. 0. Not a single one. Not the suspects, not the hostages, not the officers. Zero. The word echoed in the small office. He retired 3 years ago because Captain Morrison thought he was too close to the cases, too emotionally involved. But what Morrison saw as a weakness was actually his strength. David Marsh cared about every single person he talked to. He treated them like human beings, not threats, and that's why they listened to him. Vance stood up and walked around her desk. You two are going to go back out there and do your jobs, and you're going to remember today. Remember that sometimes the guy in the yellow vest knows more than you do. Remember that force isn't always the answer. Remember that the best way to win a fight is to prevent it from happening in the first place. Yes, ma'am, they said in unison. Dismissed. As they left, Vance sat back down and pulled up David's file on her computer. She read through his commendations, his case notes, his training records. Then she picked up her phone and dialed. It rang 4 times before he answered. Hello? David, it's Paula Vance. A pause. Hey, Paula, everything okay? I heard about this morning. Grayest and Hayes told me what happened. They did their job. They almost screwed it up. But they didn't. The girl is safe. The father is getting help. That's all that matters. Vance smiled despite herself. Still the same, David. Listen, I want to run something by you. You have time to meet for coffee? When? How about tomorrow morning? Before your shift? Another pause. Longer this time. What's this about, Paula? It's about the department needing you. And before you say no, just hear me out, please. She could hear him breathing on the other end. Could imagine him standing in his kitchen, still wearing that yellow vest. Probably making lunch for his wife, Sarah. Okay, he said finally. Tomorrow morning, 7 a.m. The diner on Main? See you there. She hung up and sat back in her chair. Outside her office, the station hummed with activity. Officers coming and going. Phones ringing. Radios crackling. Paula thought about the young officers she supervised. Thought about how many of them came from the academy with combat mindsets, trained to see every interaction as a potential fight. Thought about how many times she'd seen situations escalate because an officer felt disrespected or challenged. The department had changed. Hell, the whole profession had changed. Body cameras and protests and constant scrutiny. Officers were scared to make mistakes, so they went hard and fast, treating every call like life or death. But David Marsh knew something that got lost in all the tactical training and use of force policies. He knew that most people didn't want to hurt anyone. They were just hurting. And if you could reach that part of them, the part that was scared or sad or desperate, you could usually find a way through. The department needed that. Needed him. Paula just hoped he'd say yes. The next morning, David stood at his post at 7:45. Same corner, same stop sign, same yellow vest. The blue Subaru rounded the corner. Mrs. Chen waved. He waved back. The red pickup truck. Mr. Rodriguez with his breakfast burrito. High five through the window. The white minivan, the Patterson kids arguing in the back seat. Everything was normal. Everything was the same. Except he felt different. For the first time in 3 years, standing on that corner in that vest. He didn't feel like he was hiding. Didn't feel like he was running from who he used to be. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. A patrol car pulled up to the curb. David's chest tightened for a moment. Residual anxiety from yesterday. But then he saw who it was. Officers Grant and Hayes. They got out slowly, hesitantly. Grant looked like he hadn't slept well. Hayes kept adjusting his belt like he was nervous. Mr. Marsh, you can call me David. Grant cleared his throat. We wanted to apologize. For yesterday. We should have listened to you. David studied them. They were young, probably younger than his own daughter, trying to do a hard job in a world that expected perfection and gave them minimal training. You did your job, David said. You saw a situation that looked dangerous and you responded. That's good instinct. But here's what I'll tell you, and I told this to every officer I ever trained. Every situation has multiple endings. Your job is to find the ending where everyone goes home. Sometimes that means force. Sometimes that means patience. The hard part is knowing which one to use. Hayes nodded. We read your file, your record. We didn't realize, it doesn't matter what my record is. What matters is that you learn from yesterday. Next time you roll up on a call and someone's already engaged with the situation, Take 5 seconds to assess before you take over. Ask yourself, is this person making it worse, or are they making it better? Is the situation escalating, or is it de-escalating? And if it's de-escalating, Grant asked, then you let it play out. You provide support. You be ready in case it goes sideways. But you don't take over just because you're the one with the badge. Grant looked at his shoes. That's hard, when you're trained that you're supposed to be in control. Control is an illusion. David's voice was firm. You can't control people. You can only influence them. And influence comes from connection, not authority. A Honda pulled up to the drop-off zone. David tensed instinctively before he realized it wasn't Marcus's car. Just a silver Honda. There were probably 50 of them in this town. Hayes noticed his reaction. Are you okay? After yesterday? David considered the question. Yeah, I think I am. Another car pulled up, the department's unmarked sedan. Sergeant Vance got out, carrying 2 cups of coffee from the diner. She handed one to David. Morning. Morning, Paula. He took the coffee. I thought we were meeting at 7? I know, but I figured you wouldn't want to miss your shift, so I brought the meeting to you. She turned to Grant and Hayes. You two, get back on patrol. And remember what I told you. Yes, ma'am. They got back in their car and drove away. Vance watched them go, then turned back to David. They're good kids. They just need seasoning. They'll get there. With the right teacher, they will. She sipped her coffee. That's why I wanted to talk to you. The department needs help, David. We're training these kids to be warriors when half the time they need to be counselors. We're teaching them to win fights when we should be teaching them to prevent fights. Paula, hear me out. I'm not asking you to come back full-time. I'm not asking you to carry a badge again or work cases. I'm asking you to train. Come in 2 mornings a week. Teach the recruits what you taught me. Teach them that there's another way. David looked at his stop sign, at the crosswalk, at the school building where kids were starting to arrive for another day. I left for a reason. I know. Morrison thought you were too emotionally involved. But David, that wasn't a weakness. That was what made you great. You cared. You saw people as people, not problems to solve. And that's exactly what these young officers need to learn. A small voice interrupted them. Mr. David? They both turned. Kenji stood there with his backpack, his mother a few steps behind. Hey, buddy, you ready to cross? Kenji nodded, but he was looking at David with those serious eyes. Are you going to keep being a crossing guard? Of course, why? My mom said maybe you'd go back to being a police officer, because you're so good at it. David knelt down. You know what, Kenji? I like being a crossing guard. I like seeing you every morning. I like helping kids get to school safely. That's important work. But yesterday, you were a hero. Yesterday, I was just doing what needed to be done. Same as I do every day here. Just different. Kenji thought about this. Then he held up his hand for a high five. I'm glad you're staying. David gave him the high five. Me too. He watched Kenji walk to school with his mother. Then he turned back to Vance. What would the schedule look like? Hope flickered across her face. Tuesday and Thursday mornings, 8 to noon. You'd work with the recruits who are in their field training phase. Teach them de-escalation, crisis communication, reading body language, the stuff that isn't in the manual. And I'd still be here? He gestured to the crosswalk. You'd still be here. This is just a few hours a week, consulting. You can even do it in your vest if you want. David laughed. I don't think that would inspire much confidence. I don't know. After yesterday, that vest has a reputation. A car horn honked. David raised his stop sign and waved a group of kids across the street. They chattered as they passed, backpacks bouncing, oblivious to the conversation happening 10 feet away. When the street was clear, he lowered the sign and looked at Vance. Let me talk to Sarah, see how she feels about it. That's all I'm asking. Another car pulled up. David recognized it immediately. His stomach tightened. Marcus Turner's car. But it wasn't Marcus driving. It was Rachel, and Sophie was in the back seat, looking nervous. Rachel got out of the car slowly. Mr. Marsh, can I talk to you for a minute? David glanced at Vance, who nodded and stepped away to give them privacy. Of course. Rachel wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't cold. I wanted to thank you, for yesterday, for keeping Sophie safe, for keeping Marcus from doing something we'd all regret. How is he? She paused, searching for the right words. He's in jail, but his lawyer thinks he can get the charges reduced to a misdemeanor if he agrees to therapy and anger management, and if I agree not to press charges for the full extent. Are you going to? I don't want to destroy him. He's not a bad person. He's hurting. And he hurt me for a long time, and I'm angry about that. But I don't want Sophie to grow up without a father because he had one really bad morning. She wiped at her eyes. I'm going to ask the judge to let him have supervised visits. Real ones, not just him sitting in a room while some social worker watches. Actual time with her. David nodded. That's good. Sophie needs both of you. I know. Rachel looked back at the car where Sophie was watching through the window. Can you talk to her? She's been having nightmares. She keeps asking if Daddy's okay, if he's coming back. Of course. David walked to the car and opened the back door. Sophie looked up at him with those wide 7-year-old eyes. Hi, Sophie. Hi. Her voice was small. How are you doing? She shrugged. Okay. Your mom told me you've been worried about your dad. Sophie nodded. A tear rolled down her cheek. Is he in jail because of me? David's chest tightened. No, sweetie, he's in jail because he made a choice. A bad choice. But he made it because he loves you so much that he got scared. That doesn't make it right, but it also doesn't make it your fault. Is he mad at me? Mad at you? No. He's not mad at you at all. He's probably mad at himself, but not at you. Never at you. When is he coming home? I don't know, but your mom is working on making sure you get to see him, okay? Sophie wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Mr. David, are you magic? Despite everything. David smiled. What do you mean? You made the police officers stop yelling. You made Daddy cry, but in a good way. You made it so nobody got hurt. She paused. My mom says you saved us. David felt something crack open in his chest. Not breaking, opening. I'm not magic, Sophie. I just knew what your dad needed to hear. And sometimes that's all it takes. The right words at the right time. Can you teach me that? So I can help people too? You're 7 years old. You've got plenty of time to learn. He smiled. But I'll tell you a secret. The most important part isn't knowing the right words. It's caring enough to try. And I think you've already got that part. Sophie managed a small smile. Okay. You go to school now. Mrs. Whitmore is waiting for you. Rachel helped Sophie out of the car and walked her to the crosswalk. David raised his stop sign and watched them cross together. On the other side, Sophie turned and waved. He waved back. When they were gone, Vance returned to his side. You've still got it. I never lost it. I just forgot I had it. So, what do you think? About the training? David watched the school building, watched kids streaming through the doors, watched parents hugging their children goodbye. He thought about Marcus Turner sitting in a jail cell, probably replaying yesterday over and over. He thought about Grant and Hayes, trying to learn how to be good officers in a world that made it harder every day. He thought about all the young cops out there who'd never been taught that there was another way. Okay, he said, I'll do it. Vance's face lit up. Really? But I'm not coming out of retirement. I'm not carrying a badge again. This is consulting, teaching. That's it. That's all we need. And I'm still working this corner every morning. This isn't a replacement. It's a supplement. Done. They shook hands. Vance got in her car and drove away, leaving David alone at his post. The morning bell rang. The last stragglers hurried through the doors. The parking lot emptied. The street went quiet. David stood there with his stop sign, watching the school, feeling the sun on his face. For 3 years, he'd thought of this job as hiding, as running away from who he used to be, as settling for something smaller and safer, because he couldn't handle the weight anymore. But yesterday had taught him something. He wasn't hiding. He was waiting for the moment when his skills would be needed again, when his training and his experience and his ability to talk to people who were hurting would matter. And when that moment came, he'd been ready. He'd always be ready. A car pulled up. Linda, the other crossing guard, rolled down her window. Hey, David, you okay after yesterday? Yeah, he smiled. I'm good. What you did was incredible. Everyone's talking about it. It's what needed to happen. Still, you're a hero. David shook his head. I'm just a crossing guard. Linda laughed. Sure you are. She drove away, leaving David alone again. He looked at his watch. 7:58. 2 minutes until the next shift change, when Linda would take over and he could go home. But he didn't want to go home yet. He wanted to stand here a little longer, wanted to feel this feeling, the feeling of being useful again, of being himself again. The sun climbed higher, the morning warmed, birds sang in the trees lining the street. David Marsh stood at his post, stop sign in hand, and smiled. He was exactly where he was supposed to be. Please take a minute to like, comment, and subscribe. We post at least 3 times a week to share tales of true worth.